But first to Victoria and the hapless Libs, whose leader Jess Wilson allowed herself to be bullied by Premier Jacinta Allan. It was reminiscent of former Liberal leader John Pesutto's pathetic capitulation to Dan Andrews when the then Premier bullied him into sacking Maura Deeming instead of standing beside her as she took a brave stand for women's rights. Remember that? This time it was Premier Jacinta Allan attacking Jess Wilson after she took part in a pride rally with the Premier accusing the opposition leader of being a hypocrite. The Premier wrote on X, "I have to call out the Liberal leader's hypocrisy when I see it. If you're a political leader turning up to Pride on one day and cozying up to One Nation on the next, then you're not an ally, you're just a Liberal." Now, put to one side why Jess Wilson felt the need to march in a Pride rally and consider how spooked the Libs are by any criticism, no matter how absurd, that their first instinct is to retreat and to betray their base. The Premier's attack against Wilson and One Nation was unpopular where she posted it. It was comprehensively ratioed on X. That means she was flooded with negative comments that had far more likes and retweets than her original post. This response by women's rights campaigner Sal Grover summed up the sentiment. Sexual orientation is on the basis of sex. One Nation is actually the only political party in the country defending the reality of biological sex in law, which very specifically protects lesbian rights. The hypocrite is you. Don't weigh into issues you don't understand. Now, that's precisely how Jess Wilson should have responded. Instead, she promptly cancelled her appearance at an important regional event headlined by One Nation's Barnaby Joyce. This weekend's Across Victoria Alliance event focused on CFA funding and the Allan government's controversial emergency services levy. Massive issues in regional Victoria. But the Victorian opposition leader was not there. She claims she was not bullied out of attending and blames a scheduling mishap for her cancelled appearance. So either her office is poorly run or she's running scared. Got to say, neither scenario fills me with confidence. And Premier Jacinta Allan couldn't stop gloating.
Victorian opposition leader pulls out of event headlined by Barnaby Joyce after Premier accuses her of cozying up to One Nation. She shouldn't have said yes in the first place to the invitation. I mean, you just can't take this Liberal outfit, this Liberal leader, seriously. If your first instinct is to rush off to a misinformation convention headlined by Barnaby Joyce and One Nation, what does that say to the rest of Victorians about whose side you're on, about what you're focused on? More focused on being out there on the extremes, denying that renewable energy is important, denying that climate change is real.
Yep, that's the Premier of Victoria. That's the inept socialist overseeing the destruction Dan Andrews set in motion. And the Libs remain terrified. We need Liberal leaders with conviction, consistency and courage, not leaders who retreat at the first sign of pressure. Not a leader who marches in a pride rally but thinks appearing at a regional event headlined by Barnaby Joyce is somehow beneath her or too controversial. Let's leave the final word to Barnaby Joyce, and the way he answers this question tells you precisely why One Nation are surging in the polls, why they're recording a primary vote well above the Libs.
How many migrants should we be taking in every year?
They should be saying, how many houses have you got free? How many hospitals are working well? How many schools are not crowded? What sort of people do you need? Do you need unemployed people having babies, or do you need builders? Then you say, well, we can absorb this many people. And we're going to say, here's the contract. You want to live in Australia? There's two things you cannot be: in the crime pages or on social security. And I don't care if you're coming from the Vatican, Central America, Central Africa, or the middle of Europe. If you pine for where you came from and say, I really want Australia to be just like came from, you go back there.